Association at its founding in the late 19th
It's not
century
mandatory for
prominently included
you guys to show up.
and early
If you have a
presidents of the
conflict, don't worry about it.
were, in some cases,
I will be here
or, like the great William
because it is
James,
mandatory for
both
me to be here
philosophers and psychologists.
for
Economics
accreditation
was a part of
purposes,
philosophy in the time of Adam Smith,
which
in
are
the
a kind of
18th
dolphin.
century, whose professional chair was actually in philosophy, and of Karl Marx in the 19th, and his
Not funny.
doctorate was also in philosophy. As I've said in the first part of this lecture,
Did
this
everybody have a
separation
chance
has
to
had
watch her
costs
when,
on the side of the social sciences, who all too often
No.
forget
No.
that they might have something to learn from philosophy. But
But
the
I've been
same
listening.
thing is clearly true
Oh,
of
since I put
philosophy.
it on.
Yeah.
Oh,
Being in their own separate department, they forget that they
Um,
need to care about the other disciplines
next
and to
semester,
draw on them. for
I've set
information.
up the syllabus
This
so
need
that
for
there's no
cross-disciplinary
textbook.
curiosity and learning
Instead, I'll just have
arises in
links
different
for
ways
people
in
to go
connection with
to
different
read.
philosophical problems.
But I'm also planning on
Historians
using
of
videos
philosophy
in
have a
class and
particular
stuff.
need
But
to understand the cultural and political history
no
of
one's
the
really
regions
sure
in
that
which the
students are
philosophers they
reading or
studied
anything
lived
of
and
that
worked.
sort.
Philosophers
Obviously,
working
some
on the
are. So
emotions, as I
I'm
have
talking
done,
about
have
like
an
the
urgent need
average.
to understand the
One of
contributions of
my colleagues
psychology
said that
and anthropology.
towards the end of
And
the
in my work
semester,
on
the
the
one
emotions, I
student
really
came
have
up to him
drawn
and asked him if
extensively on these
he had a
disciplines.
book that he could borrow.
Normative political philosophy of the sort I do,
So he had
working
never
on
bought the book
development issues, has an urgent need
for the
to
course.
understand what economists and political
Basically, he
scientists
wasn't really
have been
taking the
doing
course.
in
He
development
registered for
studies.
it.
And it's not surprising
Somehow
that we now
paid
find
for it, I
graduate
guess.
programs called
But
development
wasn't really
studies
like
that
taking the
promote
course.
interdisciplinary conversation.
So that was
Though I'm afraid that too few of these programs give a
an
secure home
interesting
to
issue.
philosophy.
attendance tonight.
I would add that political
Well,
philosophers
it's
working on
after the
development
holiday,
need to learn
and
a lot more
Before
history,
the
often
politics,
after
and law
Thanksgiving
than they
break,
usually do when they write
we end up
about
with
regions of the world not their
a
own.
smattering of
When I
people that
began
show
work
up to
on
the
the book
last
that later
session.
became Women and Human Development,
Is it
And
next week
I
the last
noticed
session?
that quite a few good
next week
philosophers
is the last
were
session, but it's
addressing
the
the
final.
problems of women in developing
So
countries.
that's final week.
But typically, they would take one example
So
from
attendance
Iran,
for you isn't
one
mandatory.
example
It is for
from
me.
China, and so on, without
Didn't
engaging
know that.
in
So
detailed
all my
study of any
requirements,
particular region
all
of
my
the world.
requirements
Just-
are.
yeah,
The
it's
result
cold
was
in
that
here.
they were unable to
You're cold?
contextualize their examples,
I mean,
not
she looks a
knowing
little
the
cold,
regional,
right?
I mean, I've been in here
religious,
for like an
cultural,
hour now,
legal, and
but it's
historical
still cold.
differences within the country
If I take it off,
affected
I'm
the
like, okay,
particular
I gotta
case
put
they
it back.
observed. I decided to do things
Well,
differently,
Interesting, so
and
you'll
I've
be here.
engaged in a deep,
I will be here.
multi-regional
And
study
I'll
of
bring
India,
some
its
movies.
history,
And
its political
for
and
anyone that does
traditions.
come, we could
Before I
pick
wrote
from the movie,
anything
or
of
we
that
could
book,
discuss.
From that time onward, I've
Whatever.
always focused my work on India, and I learned
'Cause
more
the-
all the
The
time.
amount of time.
But
is
other
all fine.
members of our
I have to
multidisciplinary
be present
Human
for
Development and Capability Association
it to be
contribute
accredited.
their expertise
But
about
it's been that
other
way
areas of the world.
The whole
When
20
knowledge
some
was
years
smaller
I've
and
been
there were
here.
fewer
So
disciplines, it was
I've
easier for
gotten into the habit
philosophers
of
to know
showing
what they needed
a
to know.
philosophical movie. if
Aristotle was a
that's
great
what
physicist,
everyone knows.
psychologist, economist, etc.
Usually I
well
also
as what we
suggest
would
we
now
could
call a
eat, but
philosopher.
since we're not allowed to
Although I
eat in
note
here
that even he drew the
officially,
line at
because of
history.
the carpet,
He asked his
then
students to
that
write up
is
the
not
histories
something I
of
can
153
offer.
known
You just eat in the
political
common area.
communities, so that he could use
We
the
could,
results.
we could do that, or we could sit outside on the lawn.
Even much later,
Yeah.
it was possible for Adam
Spray
Smith
the grass.
to be one of the greatest economists, a philosopher of distinction, and
So, this is Martha Nussbaum. I've mentioned her before. Her maiden name was Craven. So she's married to a Dr. Nussbaum, which means nut tree in German, if you hadn't figured that out already. And I think I've mentioned her quite frequently before. She's considered an Aristotelian specialist, and she has quite a list of accomplishments, including winning. Notice that this is the lecture that goes with her receiving the Kyoto Prize, which is kind of a Japanese academic prize that I think mostly Americans tend to win for some reason. I don't know if I should check the list, I suppose. But she won it in, I guess, 2017. However, greetings. So you trimmed so that you could enjoy the experience of being outside.
Yeah, keeps me awake.
Yeah. I suppose. Okay, so that's Martha Nussbaum. And I should show you what her Wikipedia page. So she's 72. Her husband's Alan. And so she's got, the thing about her books are they're huge. So she's one of those, you don't just sit down for an evening, you sit down for a semester with Martha Nussbaum. So that's interesting.
Professor Nuttree.
Nut tree, yes. Nuss is nut. Baum is tree. By the way, I saw yesterday, absolutely fascinating. I think it's in Argentina. The teenagers are rebelling against Spanish and trying to introduce a neuter. Remember, Spanish is one of those languages that has male and masculine and feminine, but no neuter. Well, they've introduced the letter E instead of O or A, to introduce a neuter so that they can add neuter to Spanish. And of course, it's causing quite an interesting stir because all the conservatives are appalled and arguing that's not Spanish, etc. But they're doing that, of course, in an attempt to change the patriarchal nature of Spanish. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know if the French will eventually try that. I can't imagine it, but that would be interesting. It is teenagers, they are rebelling. I watched the one young lady explaining it. Well, you'd have to look it up. But we already talked about that with regard to English. Remember, I argued that I think one of the reasons feminism did so well in the United States is because we speak English. In English, we have a lot, I mean, practically everything in English is neuter. The only thing that we usually refer to as being male or female are actual males or females, with the exception of things like boats and maybe cars if you really love them or something, you know, that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting. Pardon? Well, your horse would be male or female, yes. Yeah, yeah. It was really dumb, I suppose, but I remember as a kid, I for some reason grew up thinking that dogs were male and cats were female. And I don't remember at what age I finally realized that there are male and female cats and male and female dogs. And that, yeah, it has to be that way, but that's pretty weird. Yes?
Sorry, what's the internet password today?
Level, if I remembered it correctly. Did it work?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, Martha Nussbaum, one of the things I've hoped to do, of course, in the class is introduce lots of living philosophers so that you get a sense of who's out there. Obviously, there's so many. I don't know them all, and I got your paper today. I haven't read it yet, but I got your paper today. In fact, I haven't checked, your email was pretty close to the beginning. I haven't gotten very far. Today was a busy day. We had department meetings and then other things. Everybody's all anxious about whether or not there will be a university next year, you know, all that stuff.
Are they gonna combine it?
Not sure what's going
They're
to,
still
no one really
talking
knows.
about that, yeah.
No one really knows. No one knows exactly how much money there will be. Apparently, it costs money to run the university.
Right?
Who'd have thought it, you know? I guess. So,
Regardless, they'll keep the satellite in GNY back.
I hope they keep all of it. Obviously, I'm biased. I think highly of education, so that's what I was saying.
Oh, you're just basically relocating students, right? Someone gets the boom from it. Let's say if you transferred everything to Anchorage, you're talking about a massive construction for housing and so forth for all these people in Fairbanks.
Well, we've already had movement over the years. The philosophy department in Fairbanks no longer offers the bachelor's degree, so students that go there for philosophy have to complete their degree by taking a lot from UAA. Because as they lost professors, they didn't replace them. So they got to the point where they couldn't offer all the courses needed for a degree. So that happens. And I think the same thing is the case in UAS. They don't really offer a philosophy degree. UAA is the only place where you, but we work together with the others, so they're not really three separate universities. They are integrated a lot. I just learned today that we do not have a physics degree. You can't get a degree in physics. It sounds embarrassing, considering how important, I mean, everything is based on physics. We don't have any people taking physics. That's pretty scary. Okay, well, so for discussion purposes, the first article I have listed for tonight is another one by my favorite philosopher to hate, Schopenhauer. And this one is how art, I do have this on, how art dispels the mist. And what he means by that is that because of the nature of his interpretation of being, remember the will is the fundamental thing in itself for Schopenhauer. His interpretation of Kant is totally inadequate, by the way, and I've enjoyed reading an interesting article on the web. It wasn't an article, it was a quote from Georg Lukács, who wrote about Schopenhauer and explained that Schopenhauer just didn't get it. And I'm like, yes, that's it, right? You know, I have that kind of attitude towards Schopenhauer. And you know, his response to Kant was to basically reject Kant's insight, his Copernican revolution, so to speak. And that was to say that, well, the will is the thing in itself, and what the will is basically fate. Remember, he was thrilled with the Buddhist idea and karma. And remember that, you know, he wasn't influential. No, I said that wrong. He was influential. That's the easiest way to say it, right? Even though I think he was wrong, he influenced a lot, especially in art. I of course, mentioned Richard Wagner, and Nietzsche as two main individuals that were highly influenced by Schopenhauer. Nietzsche thinking, yes, this is right, and then creating his own philosophy, in a sense, standing on the shoulders of Schopenhauer. So you might say, well, in that sense, Nietzsche was wrong, because his main support was wrong. But Nietzsche actually went in a different direction. So I wouldn't say that Nietzsche was wrong. Nietzsche, I think, does have an adequate answer. Right? It's not my favorite, but it's definitely one of the answers to the Hegelian dilemma of recognizing that the world appears to us, and it's modified by us, by our culture, right? So that we can have multiple cultures. As a result, you can have multiple appearances, right? Different cultures see things differently. I mean, today, of course, that's common sense. We know it, right? Where it gets difficult is when we say, yes, but even though there are different appearances from different cultures, there's some underlying reality that's absolutely still true. And by the way, our particular culture, whoever you are, is closer to right than anyone else, right? That's also pretty common for us to feel that way and recognize it. And it does seem that everybody is right, even though, of course, they're all in disagreement. I think that my favorite, being where we are, is native ways of knowing, for example. Right? When we talk about, number one, when we talk about native ways of knowing here, the goal was to aim at the indigenous of Alaska, but what's changed, of course, because we're one of the more diverse societies, is that we have lots of individuals from different cultures who, in a sense, are, well, obviously indigenous to someplace, right? And they brought their culture with them when they come here. So when we look at ways of knowing, and even if we call them native ways of knowing, and what we mean by that is something else besides the standard Western academic scientific approach to things, right? That there's some other way that folks claim to understand the universe. And then we have that juxtaposed against science. And of course, for years, science always treated all of those as simply prehistoric, pre-scientific wrong, basically, right? So you might believe that spirits are what's infected your child. You might not even say infected, but we know it's measles, right? And so if we treat them for measles, wow, the evil spirits go away. Whereas if you dance and sacrifice a goat and say certain prayers, it might not go away. It might actually go away because, of course, the nature of the disease is if you're healthy and your child is well fed and cared for, it might still, of course, with its own antibodies, whatever they call them, right, will antibodies, right? Will get rid of the disease eventually. On the other hand, 1 in 10 end up dying if they get measles. Is that right? My statistics right? It's pretty bad, so it's pretty serious. So you might not be able to persuade someone to think that it was really a injection that saved your child. They might feel that the injection is dangerous. I remember learning that the Hmong, you have at least one person who's Hmong, that the Hmong culture believed that if you're losing blood, that's bad for you because you don't get it back. And so when doctors would do a blood test and take blood from a child, they thought that was horrific. There's no way you're going to do that to my child because they'll never get their blood back, right? And yet, of course, we replace blood, etc. So you have that where it seems pretty clear that in some respects, many cultures are simply wrong about things that science has basically demonstrated to be the case. Right? On the other hand, when we talk about art, and Schopenhauer is like, how art takes away the mist, right? So the mist of unknowing, basically. We don't really understand nature out there, but art somehow penetrates that. Because when we see something beautiful, we feel that it's actually communicating that beauty to us, right? And we could do that in lots of different kinds of arts and lots of different kinds of colors and things.
Does it send some kind of like message to your brain or something, and then that you then?
Well, certainly, it would have to, if you're getting a communication from the art. What am I thinking of, for example?
If you're still scooping one of those traditional dirty litter boxes, where your cat has to step on poop to go poop,
So this is art. How many recognize it?
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
I don't want to click on anything there. So.
Hit skip trial, it'll go in.
I think I have the volume all the way up.
enemy of writing.
So, number one, I didn't pick a scene from Wagner because I didn't think you'd like that as much. But that's as close to American opera as I can. It's not really opera, it's a musical. Not really sure what the difference is, actually. But the passion that's being expressed through the music, through the singers, of course, through the cinematography, or whatever you call the movie making aspect of it. And if you're familiar with the plot, this is like the climactic moment in that whole the whole Phantom of the Opera, because this is where he makes his appearance. Everybody's like standing up and thinking it's going, it's going to happen. They're expecting the Phantom to show up. What they don't apparently realize is that the fat, horrible tenor has been killed already in the back, and this young, well, he's obviously can't be young because he's supposed to be way older, like her father, right, compared to her. In any case, right, so they don't realize that he's the Phantom. She does, because she recognizes his voice, because she's grown up in this theater hearing his voice. He's her mentor, her musical mentor. But he's fallen in love with her, which, by the way, breaks the real Phantom of the Opera. The real plot, the original, basically, is that you've got this Platonic music teacher, basically, the organist, right, that plays the famous organ piece. He's so absolutely fascinated with the sounds, right? And her voice is perfect, and he's raised her voice to be absolutely perfect. So his interest in the original is in her singing ability, and he doesn't want her falling in love with the guy in the balcony because that's going to ruin her career, right? In Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber's version of this, which, by the way, is kind of odd because Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber is the Phantom, basically. Not in the scene. He's not the actor or the singer, but he, in a sense, really is that person. He's writing the music, he's directing, he's doing all of this, and the soprano that he wrote it for, he married. Right, for about 2 years, and then Sarah Brightman, if you're familiar with her, and the pieces that she sings are aimed at her very unique voice. So if you've ever had a chance to hear her sing this role, it's a very difficult role for a soprano, and Sarah Brightman was that person. So his convoluted interpretation of the original is actually very autobiographical, oddly enough, because he basically was, in love with the soprano, and so the Phantom isn't in love with her voice; he's in love with her sexually, right? And so the passion that's displayed here is, of course, a sexual passion. And how many of you felt that as you were watching the piece? It's very good, isn't it? Did anybody hate it? I don't know. If you think about it, the music was written the same way, and I've never seen it, but Snakes on a Plane. You ever heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen
Snakes,
it.
yeah, I've never seen it. But Snakes on a Plane was crowdsourced or crowd written. It was one of those internet things where someone came up, hey, let's have a movie where the basic plot is that there are snakes on a plane. And so all these different people all like started writing how the plot might go and what kind of actors and, you know, what might happen in this movie. And they, you know, at all these different points, the people interested in it and writing suggestions and were voting also on what they liked until they eventually got to the point where those that were directing it felt that they had the, you know, a majority point of view of exactly how this movie would go, and then they produced it based that way, and it was a total failure, actually, as far as I know. That's kind of famous, I guess, because that was so obviously run by a democracy, basically. Well, this was too. Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber, but he had a limited group of friends. So what he would do is he would write a piece, then he would have it performed for his friends, a group of musical friends, and they would make their suggestions and comments, and then he would redo it, and then he'd perform it again, and they'd comment on how it was performed, until eventually got it to the point where it was kind of honed to essentially kind of a democratic, but with skilled people position. And by the way, it did absolutely fantastic. As you probably know, whole theaters were designed to produce this. The one that I'm familiar with is the one in the Venetian in Las Vegas. They made a theater for it, and it ran quite some time before they decided, okay, everybody in the world that's interested has already seen it. So, and I remember we bought cheap tickets; they were $80 a piece. So that was kind of, but it did great worldwide. It was produced all over the place. Plus multiple versions of, this is just one of the renditions of video performance. It was on PBS a couple years ago where they had a special anniversary performance, and even though you don't need to do this anymore, my wife was so taken with it, she bought the package, which she's never watched, by the way, just so you know. So my wife is one of those people that buys things with no reason for it, you know? It's kind of an odd thing. Okay.
In her head, she probably has a pretty good reason.
She liked it. She watched the TV performance, and you know how the TV says, for a DVD of this performance that you just watched,
Yeah.
send your money to the, and she did that.
Got it.
Well, you know, what can I say?
Just keeping the rest of PBS Kids operating. There is some little kid who is sitting watching PBS thanks to your wife buying that
I
DVD.
suppose.
I bought some movies I guess I probably never watched.
Painful?
Pay it forward.
Pay it forward, I suppose. Well, so what I'm trying to say is this is communicating a kind of passion between the point of no return is the point at which the two lovers end up passing the point of no return. In other words, they're not going to stop,
Yeah.
right?
Why was that other guy tearing up?
That's her boyfriend.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh, it is?
Right. The guy in the balcony is her actual boyfriend.
Oh.
They're on the stage performing this.
Is he crying because he knows she loves the other guy?
Is he-
Why was he crying? Her boyfriend, he was tearing up. Was he tearing up because...
Was he tearing up?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's tearing up. It's
Maybe
not.
'cause it was
It's
blue.
not because she's in love with the Phantom, but
Isn't
she
that
admires him and what he's done for her. Like she sees him as a dad,
Mentor.
or she's
Like a mentor.
like a mentor, but also she just has like this deep connection with him because he's been there like her whole life.
I've never
But
seen
it does screw up the
It's
plot.
confusing.
Like,
It
it's
does
worth,
screw up the plot.
Throwing on the TV, like when you're like cleaning the house or something, like the music's really good, and then like occasionally like popping in and seeing what's happening. There's not like,
They have a weird relationship. It's really confusing.
yeah,
I've seen it
like
once.
he's
I can't
kind
remember.
it's really weird because like he's known her since she like moved into the theater like really little, was kind of like an orphan, and has kind of been there like grooming her.
It's
voice
really
since
creepy.
little. It's
It's really
And
kind
then
of
he's in
creepy.
love with her?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
supposed to be the same age as that older woman you saw in that video. The older
Oh.
woman on the side of the stage. Who
Oh.
knew it
Plus
was
his
him.
face is, you know, he's got that mask on, but it was because
It was in a
he was,
fire. It's a burn mark, isn't it?
Yeah.
I forget how he's supposed
Or
to
no,
have
it's a
gotten it, but
deformity. It's a birth
he was deformed from very young and mistreated by everyone. In fact, that's part of
The story.
the story, is that
Oh.
he's been, ostracized by everyone because of his appearance.
And so the old lady you saw side stage like brings him into the theater and like lets him kind of run wild, and so he's just been hiding out in the theater, and so
He's got a whole mansion down below,
yeah.
Oh, wow.
using all sorts of, well, he's even got a lake and every, he rows
Yeah,
around.
like
and-
how there's like a lake under the theater. It's just
Cool.
Also creates dilemmas for the stage, because, they have to have a fog, and they have, this fake,
but
boat, etc.
they always leave one box open for the Phantom, and so, but like there's the prima donna soprano who she sort of sucks, and he doesn't like her for one of the roles, and so like starts like dropping the sandbags to help move stuff, like trying to drop them on her, and it runs her out of the theater, so that way
Because he wants
Christine.
to do. By the way, my one Chihuahua is named Chrissy after Christine,
Oh.
because my mother-in-law loved. We took my mother-in-law to when we went to it. We took my mother-in-law with us. So. However, but what I'm trying to argue is that even though you can't really describe what the art communicates, that it does, because it's so good, it does communicate a certain passion that an essay just wouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
A painting of two, no, that's not going to communicate that same passion. The music is powerful. The cinematography, that's the right word, right? Is beautifully done, obviously, etc. Plus, you just saw the one scene. Obviously, the piece is meant to be viewed in its entirety, which is actually fantastic. I've really enjoyed it multiple times. And if we, when I was a kid in high school, and I was in the band, and I had friends who were all also in the band, and we liked classical music, and I mean, we were bonkers over it. When the Beatles first played on the Ed Sullivan Shoe, I didn't even know it, right? I remember coming to school the next day and everybody was just, oh, aren't they fantastic? And I said, who? And they said, the Beatles. And I was, what? Who? The Beatles? And then when I finally did see them, I still think, we love you, yeah. And I thought, Mike, who the heck would be interested in that when you can look at the symphonic orchestra, with 100 people, all expert musicians playing synchronously, a fantastic piece, you've got an hour to listen to music, And especially if you can afford it, right? You know,
Yeah.
that's worth going to. You know, 4 guys, you know, with haircuts that were the same as mine at the time, you know, were just, you know, boing, boing, you know. Okay, I've heard Malcolm Gladwell's argument that they had already played 10,000 hours together, so they were all, right, because of all their gigs and everything. So by the time they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, they were, you know, a really, you know, honed, you know, group, etc. But still, you've got, what, 2 guitars, a bass, and a set of drums, right? Compared to, you know, the, you know, 100+ piece, you know, orchestra. You know, there's no comparison, you know, to, you know, in my mind, right? I mean, I've matured since, and you know, realized, well, there's lots of different kinds of music, and there's, you know, just lots of different kinds of awards, you know, for the best. You might not like her, but oh my goodness, now I can't even think of her name. What's the young blonde that has won awards in at least 2 different?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, thank you. Yeah. Romeo and Juliet, you know.
So from the Beatles.
So you
to
like Taylor
graduate,
Swift?
Well, I still don't like the Beatles.
Do you like Taylor
Wait,
Swift?
what? How do you not like
I do find Taylor Swift pretty darn interesting in a couple things. You know, and some of the things that orchestras have done with the Beatles music have been fantastic.
Yeah. It's not the Beatles.
You moved on from the Beatles to Led Zeppelin, right?
Are they the ones that did Stairway to Heaven, or?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I have had to listen to that. I mean, I've listened to that. Just to see what the fuss is all about. So, yeah, of course we grow up with musical tastes. The same thing with food tastes. I mean, that's pretty darn obvious. You know, that some folks grow up eating. I've had the pleasure to be in villages and try to eat native foods that they wouldn't tell me what they were, because they've experienced what happens to Caucasians, you know, that have tried to eat their food and known what it was, and they didn't want to deal with the mess, I guess. So they didn't tell me what it was, and it tasted fine.
So did you like Elvis?
Elvis? Not really,
He said it the way he said it.
but he wasn't as bad as the Beatles. I mean, he had, I mean, they had talent, of course. I mean, I'm the one that doesn't have talent. That's already been established, you know, by Professor Harvey Wilkinson. You don't have perfect pitch, you're out. So that was the end of my musical career. But it's amazing the things you can learn to like, and the things that you know, are, because cultures are different. We really do see things differently from different cultural perspectives, including our music, our food, our taste in mates, and you know, virtually, I suppose, anything can be different. So does that create a mist? You know, and I think part of the problem for Schopenhauer and for us is we're really in that same kind of modern situation where we're integrated with people from all different cultures, and we've learned to be respectful to all different cultures. Might not happen until maybe high school, or depends on your family, right? But as you get to the point where you realize, oh, gee, I don't like the Beatles, but you know what? I'll respect people that do like the Beatles, because of course they're some of my friends, right? And they like the Beatles, and they think the Beatles are cool, or whatever is the right expression now. Neato? No. No, it's woke. Is it woke?
No.
No,
No.
that's
Yes, it's a
specific
word,
connotation.
but not in that context.
No, oh, that's different, okay. But, yeah, so, you know, the right words even change.
I don't know.
Well,
What is the context
I
of
woke up.
Ah,
that? Yeah, I hear that
It-
word. What is the context
it's
of woke?
figurative for awake, as in being aware
Culturally.
of culturally.
Awareness of a particular subject matter that's being.
Almost all. Like
All.
the epitome, I guess, would be an idealistic state where you're aware of the current thing about absolutely everything. The most politically
Yeah,
correct, the most
it's
sensitive,
actually,
the most knowledgeable, the most is the ideal. It's impossible, I think, ideal, but it's like,
It's like you're lit.
woke.
Like
But
stay
that's their
woke.
Stay
Stay on top
woke.
of, yeah. Stay on top of all the changes and.
I read an article the other day that referred to post-woke.
Is there such a thing
I
yet?
haven't heard any of these
There's
words.
people that are post-woke, right?
That would be asleep.
Well, that's where you're even like meta-woke, I suppose.
Woke is insomnia.
So woke, I don't
Woke.
insomniac. That's a meme. You should start making memes now.
Can you see that? That's pretty small, but. So,
That's the thing.
that is really recent. It seems to me it's been like less than a year.
No, probably
No.
5.
Yeah,
Or got popular. Last 5 years, it's gotten real popular.
yeah.
I've never heard it.
Seems to me it wasn't
Social
that long
justice.
ago
Yeah,
that
it
I
has a lot to do
read,
with social justice and the idea of just, it's the awareness of other, like, outside of your bubble
Oh.
type of thing. Wait, kill all the what?
I read this, it must have been at least a year ago, Kill All Normies. In fact, you could go and listen to the author. She's I think Irish? This is commercial, right?
Yeah, my friend personally does.
Stage. There you go. Have you got fans that don't know that?
Yeah.
Alright, okay. You brought your very own fan club. So, Angela, we have to get every speaker a fan club. I'm going to start here, normies. So, for for the normies in the room, what are normies and why should they be killed?
Well, I guess the way that the term is used, obviously the book is not suggesting that. The way the term is used, I guess, just means people who don't understand online culture, who are, who don't understand the politics of the different kind of subcultures warring with each other
So
online.
non-woke people,
particularly,
right?
those who don't understand the more right-leaning kind of political subcultures.
So, where did all this start? So it started with
So the book was pretty interesting to me. She's a new writer, so it wasn't like exceptionally well written, but it was research based on online stuff that I've not been aware of, subculture online stuff, where there's a lot of horrendous hatefulness going on. I mean, we've seen a lot of that in kind of the broader culture too, but there are groups of people that. So she's not suggesting we should kill all normies. There are folks, however, that argue that, theoretically, right, all normies should be killed, because, they don't like them, right? So she introduced me to that whole subculture, and there's like the dark internet, where people are. And by the way, it actually blends into real life, because some people that kind of live their lives on that dark web do actually take action in the real world and kill people, for example. I remember the one, especially I think at the young man that hated women and college women in particular, and so he took a gun and he drove through a campus the one night shooting people, right? That happened a few years ago. Apparently, he spent so much time on the dark web that really takes over your cultural thinking, and so he put it into action and went out and actually killed people randomly. They were just like at various places. He didn't know them, but he just shot them.
Are you referring literally to the dark web as in the .onion sites? Or are you referring to a darker side, a deeper side of conservative,
Yeah, it's been at
web?
least a year since I
Deep web.
read her book, but she talked about a couple internet sites where you could go on and be anonymous.
Oh, so what, you're talking about like 8chan and stuff like that?
4chan?
Yes.
Well, you have 4chan, and then it's like even worse brother is 8chan. Basically, when 4chan decided to start implementing rules, which it hadn't done before, 8chan was created, and it's everything that 4chan thought was bad. And 4chan will let anything go. So if you think, if 4chan will let anything go, and it finally drew a line in the sand, just start to imagine what they had to decide was over the line.
Right. So not the literal dark web then.
No.
Well,
The figurative,
see, I'm
darker side.
not
of
sure
the
what the
internet.
dark web is.
It's a .onion site
Me
instead of .com. It's the
Yeah.
anonymous side of the internet. You know how you have a URL address that ends in .com? .onion is .onion instead of .com, and it's a random, I believe it's 16 or more. It's like a hexadecimal system, random number code. And so there are no names to anything, but you could type it in. You can download the programming to get your computer to be able to run the dark web. But unless you know people, you're in some kind of criminal organization or network, like you would just type in random numbers and see what pops up. You wouldn't have any way to navigate the dark web unless you knew people who knew how. That's the dark web. And that's very scary.
Well, that's what I got from her book, that all of this is very scary. Not that I wanted to go and dive in myself and find out. There's a lot of things on the net I'm not interested in.
You can get anything you want on the dark web. It's completely
I think you could
anonymous.
find anything you want on the light web, or whatever we call the other one. I've learned that the main limit I have to being successful and finding something is my own imagination. If I
And Google
try,
algorithms.
and I can actually find amazing things out there. I've mentioned like letters between Rousseau and Voltaire. Who would have, you don't see those in the library, but guess what? You could just research them on the internet, and you can find even specific letters. I think the one night after I went home after class, I had mentioned a letter between Rousseau and Voltaire, and how Voltaire recommended to Rousseau, if he wanted to be popular, just write a book that said everything the opposite of what everyone believed. So I thought, well, I better go check my source on that. And so I was looking and found a couple letters. So, there's tons of stuff out there. You could prove that aliens exist in Area 51 or whatever it is. There's all kinds of stuff out there. But we use all these different kinds of art, and I'm sure we could figure out, what she's doing is talking about a environment where people are experiencing a culture that includes arts. Might not like them, but I might not want to say all the arts out there are something that we should respect. That's an issue too. There are some arts that you feel like, wait a minute, I recognize that we should respect other people and other cultures and so on. But what if it's a rape culture? You know, like in India, you know, where even the police rape someone and claim, you know, that they found the people that did the raping and killed them. And it turned out, of course, it was actually the police in India that had raped the girl and not the 4 guys that, I mean, you know, that might be their culture, but I'm not respecting it, right? Because there are moral limits, I think, to that. But how do we explain those limits? Right? I mean, you know, some of the things that our president apparently has done over the course of his life, I find absolutely despicable. You know, but, you know, how do you find, you know, where those limits are? Which president? As far as I know, so far, all of them, actually.
That's right, to be fair, you're right.
It seems almost like in order to have that kind of accomplishment, you have to have certain characteristics that are not very laudable. If people knew what I always used to find it odd all over the East Coast where you'd see signs, George Washington slept here. You know. Well, you could read about his and Martha's relationship. Wasn't a good one, actually. You know, so there's all kinds of things. And an awful lot of syphilis going around back then, you know, so. Okay. So the flip side, though, for Schopenhauer is that the power that art has connects us to this power that he feels is the thing in itself, the real will, or the real heart of nature in the universe. And art gives us this direct connection to it. And there certainly is something to that. Now, I would still say that his interpretation of Kant is wrong. And it's not like he's finding the thing in itself. It's still a cultural phenomena. And passion is a cultural phenomena. So I think Hegel's interpretation of the way culture and emotion and everything else is attached to our social reality is a much better explanation for it than Schopenhauer. But on the other hand, Schopenhauer has certainly made a point, you know, that art enables us to communicate stuff that we can't communicate otherwise, or you know, we're not as successful, at least, in trying to communicate it. It's kind of interesting that Wittgenstein, I think I've mentioned Wittgenstein before. But when we think about Wittgenstein, we think of the 2 periods, or 2 different philosophies that he's sort of introduced, both language-oriented, one being the analytic philosophy, which he was really part of Bertrand Russell and Gottlob Frege and others in creating that. But then the second one is the ordinary language analysis school of thinking. And so he's influenced those 2. I prefer to think of the one as kind of leading into the second one, and the second one being kind of a variation of the first school. But the point he makes in his book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, in the very beginning, where it's introduced by Bertrand Russell which was a requirement for it to be published, because the school said, we'll publish it because Russell wanted it published, but only if you write an introduction to explain it, right? And then, so Russell wrote this introduction, and they published it. And Wittgenstein argued Russell didn't understand it, right? You know, because he argues that logic will enable you to say what is the case. So all the statements that people can make are basically that are true or false. And we've talked about this too. Have a good week. Are you coming next week too, or not sure?
I should be able to make it. Sorry, I have things to do tonight.
Thank you, Pixie. So you have statements like, you know, remember this is a cup. That's can be said, and we can know that they're true or false, right? And that's what science, Wittgenstein says, can say, right? You know, these are facts, right? But you know what? They're all absolutely boring. They're not valuable. You know, there's no value in it, because I remember I can't say this is a good cup or a bad cup, because that's not scientific. That's my own point of view, right? Depending on our culture or what you're looking for in a cup, et cetera, right? So a scientist, well, I mean, think about it. If you were like in quality control, you know, and you were checking all the cups, and you're like, oh, this isn't a good cup, you know, because it doesn't meet the criteria. That's certainly a factual situation. So that's a slightly different issue regarding quality control, right? Then I say, oh, that's a good cup, right? The point Wittgenstein's trying to make there is that values, where our lives are important, don't come under the scientific true or false statements. So you can't say that, you know, our values are true or false, right? And so even though science is capable of saying everything that's true or false, that's not what's important in life. And so the very last statement of his Tractatus is, whereof, it's where, I misspelled it. Let's do it this way. I could just say statement 7. So so whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Well, that's a terrible translation. There's a much better. I've heard much better translations than that. So whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It's just dumb, actually. The idea being that I can't say this is a good cup. I have to be silent. In other words, science can say what it can say, the facts and all the facts, right? But where we get emotional or value, science can't speak. Well, but we do. And it's in art that we do. And he'll say that as well, right? That it's in art. And by the way, he was influenced by Schopenhauer. So you could see that again. And this, I think, we do share culturally today, the sense that art communicates very effectively, music especially, and there's lots of interesting studies why that is, because when we hear the music, it literally changes the brain waves so that our brain waves match the waves of the music if you let it. Like, if you hate the music, you can block it. So you're not going to, be listening and thinking love me tender, love. You know, it's, you know, you don't have to, you know, go that way. Just kidding. I have friends that would shoot me if I even thought I disrespected Elvis for 1 minute. Every time I go to Vegas, I have to come back with some sort of Elvis thing for that friend, you know, that's, you know, or else, right? You know, whatever. However, and I'm not allowed to praise any of the impersonators. They're just all absolutely terrible. And that friend, by the way, is Okinawan. Okinawan. There's an island.
Mm-hmm. Okinawa.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, isn't the impersonator of Elvis Presley just as much art as the memorabilia you bring back? Is your Okinawan friend a good friend, validly? Is it scientific to say
He is a good friend. He is a good friend, but
he is not a philosopher.
now he's a retired teacher, actually. But, okay. So, that's kind of my take on Schopenhauer's article. What did you get from it? Anything interesting? Or?
I find him hard to understand. He has a way of winding around with his sentences without adding enough periods. And
remember, it is translation.
True.
He's a German, and German language is famous thanks to Mark Twain. But it's true. It's true.
I did like pondering what exactly he meant by art only being capable of representing an example, a fraction of the transcendent truth that philosophy seeks to represent. That was interesting, because it makes me compare philosophy in its pursuit of a transcendent truth to axiomatic truths, right? Things that evaluative in nature are still true, regardless of whether they can be proven by science. Those are the truths that we all feel, perhaps can't express, except in whether we embrace or recoil from something.
Those were not the ones that he was thinking of, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's thinking instead of this karma, like I remember he's got an interpretation of Buddhism. He's like the philosopher that introduced it into common parlance, or among those that at least read him in Europe. It did become really popular there. A lot of Oriental things did. You look at the art in Paris, slightly after that, they really got into the silks and the different art from like Japan and China and stuff, urns and wallpaper, peacocks and all that stuff.
What period was this?
It was
Nouveau?
Impressionist period, yeah.
Not Art Nouveau, okay.
But, so Schopenhauer, he is important, did have a lot of influence, even though, of course, I still feel like his interpretation is not the best. And in the first part, we still have Aristotle on tragedy, which I think ties in to it. But let me see if I had... Oh, here's the art. Takes away the mist, right? Looking at the first page of it, which is 624, I underlined, for this alone has interest for the intellect as such. And I highlighted that by saying the will, with a capital W, right? Time, I put question mark. What is life? Every genuine and successful work of art answers this question in its own way with perfect correctness. Don't know what the heck he's talking about there, of course. Unless he's saying that, you know, even a kid drawing a picture of a lion or something in some sense is in touch with reality while he's doing that, I suppose. Further down in the second column there, he says, therefore, for reflection and abstraction to give an answer which just on that account shall be permanent is the task of philosophy. So that's like his thinking that philosophy's job is to, geez, Isaac. But further he says, but cannot be directly discerned by everyone through the mist of objective and subjective contingencies. Art takes away this mist, etc.
I had a question.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on 625, where it begins with "it follows"? About halfway down there, "It follows from all this that in the works of the representative arts, all truth is certainly contained, yet only virtually or implicitly. Philosophy, on the other hand, endeavors to supply the same truth actually and explicitly, and therefore in this sense is related to art as wine to grapes." Do you agree with that?
Not completely, but I can understand, I think, what he's trying to say, and that is that, like, say, the Phantom of the Opera, that's trying to present an emotional performance that we can appreciate. A critic is going to take that apart and basically philosophize about what that all is. I sort of did that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, while we're appreciating the performance and enjoying the emotion of it, the critic, or in this sense, the philosopher, is going to make it explicit. It's going to like turn it into the wine, instead of, but not in a especially good way. I mean, it. I don't think he would feel like philosophy does a good job compared to the art itself. So Wagner's actually, what's odd is he never actually liked Wagner. Even though Wagner adored him, the music that he liked, I think, was Brahms. Actually, I don't remember specifically. Was Brahms even around then? I forget. But I'm sure Schopenhauer had his favorites, but I'm pretty sure that he hated what Wagner wrote to him. Wagner made up a language for the opera's The Ring cycle. It was supposed to make it seem ancient, right? So it's kind of like a lot of the language in, say, the Lord of the Rings or something. Tolkien made that up, but Tolkien did it much better, right? Wagner made up his own ancient German, and Schopenhauer hated it, right? But Schopenhauer was a hard, person to please, So remember, no one else liked him except his poodle, right? So kind of a hard you can meet people like that, but you don't like them especially, right? But so with this particular piece, I think that's my sense of it, is that he's arguing that the philosopher's supposed to make it explicit. We're supposed to write down this is the case, right? But you feel it much more powerfully through the art itself, and you could not just music, but you could do that with statues and things of that sort, where you go in and you see a powerful David standing there contemplating how he's going to kill this sucker, depending on the David, right? There's post-Goliath Davids and pre-Goliath Davids, depending on who the artist was and what they liked about all that story. Voltaire has very rightly said, the secret of being a bore is to tell everything. Which actually you can never do. I didn't underline anything on the back, the last page. But certainly the artist ought to think in the arranging of his work, etc. Hamlet, Faust. Okay, but the second piece that I picked, I did just pick these out of the text to try to put them together to make life interesting for you guys, right? This is Aristotle on tragedy, because of course tragedy is an art. As a dilemma, because what Aristotle calls tragedy and comedy are, well, we don't actually have the comedy stuff because that was lost. If you're familiar with the Name of the Rose, the movie with Sean Connery, or the book, the basic plot line there is that the book, Aristotle's book on comedy, was in that particular monastery, and the one senior monk thought it was evil because it made people laugh, and so he doctored the text by putting arsenic on the corners, and as a result, everyone that read the book died because they would all, you know, go like this, you know, and so everyone that got a hold of that book and laughed because of the jokes in the section would all die. And of course the book ends up being destroyed in the fire at the end of the movie. So you've never heard of, seen the movie?
What's it called?
The Name of the Rose.
I've heard of it, but it's been so long. It's an older one.
Yes, yes, it's, well, Sean Connery. Let's see if I can show you the trailer.
What's the look at the one? I think Sean Connery is in it. But he listened to that YouTube music. The little thing he's a bomber. He bombs.
Having trouble falling or staying asleep?
20 years old.
Maybe you should talk to your doctor about those.
This is the trailer for that.
Within these walls,